our flag, Gáfií again. Now, I won't be talking any more Irish, but I thought it would be appropriate just to open with a few words of Irish because, you know, we're all familiar with the 1901 census. And if you look up the 1901 census, a lot of people find that their grandparents and their great-grandparents either spoke Irish and English, or in the case of some of my ancestors in the Beara Peninsula, some of them only spoke Irish. So, you know, I think we're only speaking English for maybe 100, 150 years, and I think it's appropriate to show, you know, consideration and a bit of affection for the language of our ancestors. Now, I'd like to introduce Fergal Dennehy, Lord Mayor of Cork, who very kindly agreed to come along and open the conference for us this morning. Now, Fergal and his family have given great service to the city. His dad, John Dennehy, was also Lord Mayor of Cork, and he's actually present here because he's also a member of our society and has a huge interest in genealogy. So without further delay, I'll introduce you to Fergal, and thanks again for coming.
It's a great honour as Lord Mayor to be here this morning to officially open the 8th Genealogy Conference here this morning. And I said to Eddie coming in this morning, I'm not saying the other word, I've spent all week, genealogical or whatever. So you'll forgive me for taking the shortcut, Eddie, thank you. At the outset, I really want to extend my sincere thanks to Eddie Wallace, Chairman of the Organising Committee, and to the rest of the committee as well for the wonderful work that you do. Eddie does wonderful work, and you know, bringing together these one-day family history conferences, it's a true service to our community, but your passion for genealogy is well known. I think what makes it even more remarkable is the way that that's extended right out to our communities, to our libraries, to men's sheds and women's groups, and you know, right throughout society. I want to thank you for doing that work. It's not about one-off events like this. It's far greater than that, so thank you for that. Today, we're also very fortunate to have some excellent speakers. We have Zoe Reid, a custodian of the National Archives, whose expertise in preserving and making available our shared documentary heritage, that's truly invaluable. As you all know, Zoe plays a vital role in ensuring that future generations can access the records that tell the history and the stories of who we are and where we've come from. Likewise, we have our own Niamh Twomey here this morning as well, a heritage officer at Cork City Council, who works tirelessly to safeguard and promote the heritage of our city. Niamh has brought history alive in our schools, in our communities and public spaces, ensuring that heritage is not just a distant concept, but something that we experience every day. And you know, I know from working with Niamh, she's a person that's not 9 to 5, it's 7 days a week, and always ready to help and assist and promote and fund groups as well right across our city. So Niamh, thank you, great to see you this morning. Terry Carney, of course, well known from Skibbereen Heritage Centre, whose work in Cork, and of course particularly I guess in West Cork, from the Great Famine to local folklore, has been both groundbreaking and deeply human. Terry has shown how local history connects to global narratives and how the stories of just ordinary people shape our understanding of the past. And I guess from a personal perspective, over the years I've watched Dad, who's here this morning, completely engross himself in the world of genealogy, patiently tracing our family roots, uncovering relatives we never even knew existed, and piecing together fragments of history through countless hours of online research and conversations with people far and near. His passion, and I've seen it at first hand, has taken him down boreens across North Cork, shears in hand of course, gently clearing away ivy and other overgrowth from headstones to reveal the names behind them. And I guess that's something that all of you do, and I know, particularly from listening to Dad, people may know he was an alderman, councillor and alderman for over 30 years in the Southwest Ward, But I think after finding our relatives in North Cork, he reckons that he could have been an alderman in North Cork as well. We have so many relatives, but we didn't know that at the time, unfortunately. In witnessing Dad's dedication, I've come to see genealogy, it's just not research, but it's a way of honouring those who came before us, of preserving memory and finding connections across generations. It's a labour of love, curiosity, and of course respect. With that spirit in mind, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful and a productive conference. May it spark discoveries, deepen connections, and continue this shared journey of uncovering who we are and of course where we came from. So have a great conference.
Thanks very much to Fergal for coming along today, taking some time out of his busy schedule to come along here early in the morning. Now, we'll be starting with our first speaker in about 5 minutes, if she's here. Oh, she's here. So we might even start a little bit sooner. Now, just to say a few words about Niamh Twomey. Now, she is the Heritage Officer of Cork City Council, and she's obviously huge experience of heritage in Cork, because she's in that particular position for 20 years, and she'd be very familiar with, we'll say, I suppose, groups like the Cork Genealogical Society and all the other heritage societies in the city, and various initiatives that are taken by the City Council to promote heritage in schools and in various other areas. No, she's a very interesting and important job, and she's going to give us an account now of what she does and how it benefits all of us. So, Niamh.
Yes, Maria Blair, agus awesome down Seanov, agus tá sé calling and Cooper Buckle on Friday a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I suppose when Eddie first asked me to speak today, I was terribly nervous because I said to him, I wouldn't know a fraction of what your audience would know about genealogy. But he very quickly reassured me that he thought it would be interesting for me to speak a little bit about what I do and what I do in the city, and perhaps even how I can help heritage groups and organisations throughout the city, and maybe you're involved in other groups as well, which may be of benefit. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, basically just what I do and the services that we provide. So, just a little bit of background. This is my 20th year as Heritage Officer, and to be honest with you, it feels like yesterday. They say that when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, and that's certainly how I feel. So I was appointed in 2005, which was, as you recall, the year of the City of Culture. Cork City was the City of Culture that year, so it was a very auspicious year to start. I'm based in the Strategic Planning, Heritage and Economic Development section, quite a mouthful, but basically I'm part of the planning department. A lot of heritage officers are based in the planning department, or else they'd be based in the community or corporate affairs department around the country, but I'm based in planning. And I'm very fortunate because I'm part of a fantastic team, includes the city archaeologist. We have 2 building conservation officers, and we very recently, in the last 2 years, have a biodiversity officer working with us. I think we're one of 8 local authorities around the country that have a team like this of heritage experts. In many local authorities, there's just a heritage officer, or a heritage officer, a biodiversity officer, and they cover all aspects of heritage. Again, Cork City is very fortunate in that we have other services, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, including the museum, the archives, the parks department, and the library section, all of which are vital for promoting heritage in the city. So the role of Heritage Officer, I often describe it as a jack of all trades and master of none. The team I mentioned earlier that I work with, the conservation officers and the archaeologists and the biodiversity officers, they're all specific specialist people. They are experts in that area. Whereas with the Heritage Officer, I know a little bit about lots of things. So I suppose my qualifications would be in a science degree in zoology and a master's degree in environmental science. My previous employment have included things like being a zookeeper. I've also worked in. You can't really hear me, can you?
Okay,
Can you hear me down the back?
Better, yeah.
Okay, much better. Okay.
Sorry.
So my previous employment I've been a zookeeper. I've worked in renewable energy. I've been a community development officer. So you can see there's a large range of experience there, which kind of makes me ideal really for this role because I know a little bit about lots of things. So what is the role of the Heritage Officer? First and foremost is to produce and implement the Cork City Heritage Plan. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. Provide advice on heritage matters within the council. So I work a lot with the other departments in the local authority, so I could be talking to somebody in architects one day, I could be talking to someone in housing another day, in infrastructure or roads another day, and I'm trying to provide as much advice as possible. And then I also provide advice and support to the public and community groups who are involved in heritage. Occasionally I comment on planning applications, and that would generally be around the area of natural heritage or around the area of, say, something specific to heritage, like, maybe something to do with plaques or street furniture or things like that. And then the last bit, which is kind of what I'm doing today, is to raise awareness, and I often organise events as well to promote heritage. So a typical day. There is no typical day, which kind of makes it interesting and it's never boring. So I could start off the day planning to do some work on an action from the Heritage Plan, or I could be organising an event. And then someone would pick up the phone and ring me and say, oh, we have a problem with this, can you advise on that? And I would deal with that, or maybe go out on site to look at something that's a problem. And then in the afternoon I could have an appointment to meet somebody from a community group about a project that they're running or looking for funding for or something like that. So it's a very varied day, but I'd say nearly every day I'd learn something new because there are experts out there that know a lot more about things than I do, and I work with them quite a lot, so I'm learning all the time, which is really great. So the Cork City Heritage Plan. It's a 5-year plan. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but this is the picture here of the most recent one. It is a strategic plan and it is an action plan. So there could be, say, 40 actions in the plan, and the idea is to deliver those 40 actions over a period of 5 years. And the actions then could be around conservation, management and interpretation of the heritage of the city. Up to recently we didn't have a biodiversity officer, so I was kind of doing that job as well. So that's why this current plan is the Heritage and Biodiversity Plan. But now that we're fortunate enough to have a biodiversity officer, in fact, it's like buses, I was waiting 15 years for a biodiversity officer and we got 2. So we have 2 biodiversity officers now. So there will be a separate biodiversity plan, please God, in the next 5 years. So what is the process of producing the plan? So the first stage is reviewing the existing plan, which is what I'm doing right now. Our current plan is up at the end of 2026. So I'm reviewing the plan that we have now. And then the next step is to establish a heritage forum. That's quite an important part of the plan because this is an advisory group and it's made up of people from all walks of life that have a role or an interest in heritage. So we'll have our own internal staff who work in heritage, but more importantly, we'll be looking outside of the City Council for people to input into the plan. So we'll be talking about people who are in heritage groups, people in universities, people who work in the area of heritage, like, for example, somebody like an architectural architect or somebody like that. So we have people from outside who advise us on the plan. And in this bit here, we put together a draft and then we go to public consultation, because it's very important to hear what people out there who are living and working and breathing heritage feel about the plan. And then obviously it has to go to council for approval. It's very important that there's an Aishtú Comhanas Gaeilge as part of our heritage. The Irish language is very important, so we always translate our documents into the Gaeilge, and then it's published and distributed. So the timescale for that is we're reviewing the plan now, and at the start of next year we'll be establishing the Heritage Forum, and we, with a view to producing maybe a draft plan for public consultation by the end of 2026. So that's the timescale we have at the moment, and we're hoping that will keep going. I love this picture here. This is Rita Dooley, and she is from Glanmire, and she opens her beautiful house in Glanmire for Heritage Open Day every year. But I think it symbolises the way that people who live and work in heritage are very open and very welcoming people. So I suppose what is covered in the Heritage Plan and what do I consider heritage? And I try and break it down into kind of like 4 categories, more for myself than anybody else, because it's kind of a difficult thing to describe. So first and foremost you have archaeology, and that can be things like the medieval street patterns of the North and South Main Street, the city walls, which in Cork are mainly underground, historic graveyards, which is probably an area that you are very much more familiar with than me in terms of gathering data. And then structures such as Elizabeth Fort and Red Abbey, and this is a lovely, very old map, as you can see, 1545, the plan of Cork. So you can see there how the city has developed over time. And then, of course, there's built heritage. So I suppose we have imposing buildings. We've got gorgeous cathedral like St. Finbar Cathedral and St. Anne's Shandon. And they, of course, are very important. But there's also the more modest vernacular buildings. They also tell a story, and just because they're not big and magnificent and shiny and gold, it doesn't mean that they're not important. They have a very important story to tell. And you can see a lot of those buildings around the city in the Shandon area, and I mentioned Barrack Street here in my example. And then, of course, we have a huge military story to tell. And we have places like Blackrock Castle and Elizabeth Fort, and of course Collins's Barracks as well, which is very interesting buildings. And then Cork has always been a merchant city, so industrial buildings are really fascinating and important story to tell too. So things like warehouses and distilleries. But you can see very clearly in the architecture in Cork, and if you take someplace like George's Quay, where you have a lot of bow windows. Like that tells more about our merchant city history, because they're very Dutch in their design. And if you go down the South Mall and you've got the steps that are going up into the banks there, again, that's a very Dutch thing in the sense of the city with water and boats. And it's often said by architects that a lot of our architecture is far more remnant of Europe than it is of Britain, which would have, say in Dublin, we've got Georgian buildings, but in Cork it has a much more varied and more nuanced story to tell. And then a very important part of heritage is natural heritage, which shouldn't always be thought of as being part of heritage, but it is the birds, the bees and the trees, which are obvious. But we also are very fortunate in Cork City that we have a designated site in Blackrock Harbour. It's a special area of conservation, specifically for wintering birds. We have incredibly rare wintering birds right on our doorstep of the city, and that is quite special for a city to have. And then we have a lot of protected species, bats and otters. We have a very healthy otter population in the river, and we actually have seals in the river as well. I'm sure you may have seen them yourselves if you ever have cup of coffee there by the Clayton in town. You'll see the otters and the seals there. And a very important part for natural heritage for a city are public open spaces and parks, golf courses, playing pitches. These are all green spaces that we don't often associate as being important, but they're incredibly important for our natural heritage. And then graveyards and gardens, they're also really important. So the cultural heritage here is, I suppose, where the genealogy sits. So when I say cultural heritage, I'm talking about things like museums, archives, libraries, universities. Local history and local heritage societies are all part of cultural heritage. Folklore is a really important part of our cultural heritage. Things like street furniture and signs. I don't know if anybody recognises this sign here. This is probably about that size. And it's a fire call. So that would have been put up in a building for people back in the good old days if they had paid insurance. So if there was a fire and the fire brigade came out, they would see that on the wall and they'd know that they paid insurance and they put out the fire. So this was kind of like the original documents that you keep somewhere safe in your house. It's a beautiful thing, it's a beautiful piece. And we have collections of little things like that, little quirky little things around the city that tell stories. And then customs and languages and accents and things that are very specific to Cork City that other places don't use or they don't. For example, I have a friend who's from Ballinasloe, and when he moved to Cork, he was like, what is it at Christmas time with the bits of meat that are rolled in dirt? What is that about in the market? And I was like, that's spiced beef. It's Christmas time in Cork with spiced beef. He'd never seen it before. So there's lots of things like that that are very Cork. And they're very hard to measure. It's very hard to say this is important because, or to describe it even. Sometimes it's just a feeling. And I think people from other parts of the country state very clearly that Cork people have a very strong sense of their own identity. And people from Cork will tell you very fast that they're from Cork. There's no hiding about it. So things like that are very hard to measure or describe. They're sometimes just a feeling. And genealogy would come in under cultural heritage for us. So genealogy is the study of families, family history, and the tracing of descendants of a person. I got that from your own website. So I was sure that it was correct. But I suppose, and I like this picture here. This was a launch of an event I was doing. This is a very famous singer, Sean O'Shea, you probably remember him. But I like the picture because, the expression of Skyler is O'Gluin, is that correct one, I think? Yeah. So, the way stories are handed down from father to son. And I think this picture is lovely because you have a person who's a little bit older, and he's talking to somebody who's a little bit younger, and he's telling them something. And that's what's so important for people to have a sense of place, and a sense of belonging, and a sense of community. And that is far more wide implications than just tracing your family or just having a conversation about the past. This is about people feeling strong and embedded in their community where they live, and a sense of place. And when you have that feeling, you have a lot less antisocial behaviour, a lot less vandalism, a lot less crime and violence against young people or old people. So it's more than just the actual act of genealogy, I think. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about my role as Heritage Officer and I suppose some of the projects that I would run. And these would all be actions from the Heritage Plan. So I'm just giving you kind of a little whistle-stop tour, really, I suppose, of some of the things that I do as part of my job. And there might be things here that might be of interest to you, or you might like to avail of, and please feel free, my contact details will be at the end, so feel free to get in touch. So one of the most successful things that we did was we established a heritage grant scheme. Now, it's small, it's very small, my budget is tiny. But it is, sometimes it's just about enough to keep a heritage group on their, to keep them going. So the grants are between 200 and 1,000 euros per grant. And it's a small core funding. And it was really set up for groups that really couldn't get money from anywhere else because they weren't going to do this big whizzy-do shiny project. Like, this money is used by local groups to pay the rent for their meetings, to give their speakers a few bob for their petrol money when they come and do their talks, monthly talks for them. And this is funding that you can't get really from anywhere else. So it's aimed at community and heritage groups like yourselves, who do work primarily on a voluntary basis, let's face it. And it greatly benefits the heritage and biodiversity of Cork City. So since 2015, we've supported over 200 groups, and we spent about €120,000 in total. Now, when you do analysis of value for money, it's very hard sometimes to do that. But if you put a price on the voluntary contribution that these groups make, if you even gave the lowest rate of pay per hour for the amount of work that goes in there, you could add another 2 zeros onto that 120,000 in terms of the value that it is for heritage. And these are the things that you have to push with the decision makers. You have to explain to them, okay, it's 120,000, but the value is far greater than that. And that's open to any group. But we do also support individuals in certain circumstances as well, depending on the project. And the other really interesting grant scheme is a publication grant scheme. So that's for between 1,000 and 4,000 per publication grant. It has to be a book. And it has to be in relation to Cork City, and it has to be a very strong heritage theme. This came to our attention after the first heritage plan. I should say that the upcoming heritage plan will be my fourth. So the first heritage plan, when it was finished, it came back as part of the feedback is that there is a need for a grant for people who want to produce a book, because you could have a really interesting, really important local heritage story, and you take it to a publisher and they're not interested because it's not big enough for them, it's not, shiny enough. They're in a national audience. And what I found was that local historians were writing books, they were going to the credit union to get a loan, personal loan, to publish the book, and then they were hoping by the sales of the book that they could pay back their loan. This is how they were. And these books were really important because sometimes they were very specific, or they were very quirky stories, or things that were very local. So what we're trying to do with this grant is to take away that anxiety and that responsibility. And we'll fund the book. And people kind of say, oh, well, do you get money back? And anyone who's been involved in the publication will tell you there is no money in publications. They're lucky to get like 5 or 10 cents on a book, not to mind anything else. So I never worry about the sales and making money back, But we have had an amazing number of books. So I've said here 24 books produced and 50,000 spent since 2015. I just gave an example of 2 books, but there are so many more and so many interesting ones. One of the top is Amongst the Stones, about the history of St. Joseph's Cemetery by Ronnie Hurley. Some of you may know him. Ronnie had passed away there during COVID, a terribly sad loss for the city. But he availed of this grant. And the other one then is Anton O'Callaghan, Processions and Parades in Cork City, which was a really interesting story. Very quirky kind of topic, really. But again, something that, a lot of people remember from their childhood, going to the Eucharistic procession and, the various parades that would have happened in the city over time. So these grants have been vital, really, for the groups. Events and Heritage Week, I suppose this is kind of the fun of it. But again, it's really important too, because you don't want heritage to be all dry and boring. You want it to be fun and entertaining and interesting. So some of the events we've organised, there's one upcoming in November, the Deco in the Detail, I think it's called. So we're working with the department in Dublin who deal with heritage. And 20th century architecture is something that isn't really known very well, and there's been several books written about it recently, but it's to look at Art Deco and the Art Deco style in Cork City. So there's going to be an exhibition to talk about that. And we used to be involved in the Cork Past and Present exhibition, which some of you may remember. Again, the two main people involved in that have sadly passed away, so we're not sure what the future of it is, but these are kind of events whereby different groups can come together and they can talk to each other about their projects and their various activities and get a bit of peer-to-peer support, which is very important. Then there's training, which I suppose are kind of like events in one way. I have provided training on Cork City Council staff because that's really important as well to empower our own staff to make the right decisions when it comes to heritage. Because sometimes what happens is that I may not necessarily be aware of the project until it comes to the end, and then I have to sweep in then like the big bad wolf saying, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that, and then I'm the baddie that's stopping the project. So when you build up capacity within an organisation, then people can make the right decisions for themselves. We've also done a lot of training for on traditional skills and crafts, and this is something that is dying away very sadly. It's very hard to get people who are skilled in things like ironwork or thatch. No, that's not so much an issue in Cork City, but around the country it's very hard to get people who are skilled in stonework and traditional wall building and things like that. So we try and provide training to build up those skills and crafts and support them. And you can see there one of the little brochures we published, the Berlurg and the Sayre. That's a little brochure on the secret language of the masons, the stonemasons of medieval Ireland. And that's a really interesting little quirky story there about how they have their own language and they've used it over the years. And it was just a little bit of an explanation on that. It's very interesting. So Cork Heritage Open Day is probably one of our biggest events. I don't know if anybody has participated in the event. It's running 20 years. It was one of my first big projects to prove myself when I first started working in the local authority, and it was originally for the City of Culture, and I thought, that's it now. I'm done. It was a big job, and I'm done, and it's very successful. It's all great. 20 years later, I'm still doing it. And it has grown arms and legs. And every year I say to myself, do you know what? This will be the last year now because people won't be interested. And every year there's more people, which is wonderful. So the idea behind it was to kind of to appeal to people's inherent nosiness. To get a sneak in behind the door of the building that they walk past every day and they go, I wonder what goes on in there now. I'd love to get a look in there. And this is their opportunity to do it. We have about 40 buildings participating every year. Now these are buildings that wouldn't usually be open to the public, or if they are open to the public they would charge a fee, or if they are open to the public you don't get behind the scenes. You don't get to sneak around the back. And we have all kinds of buildings. So like for example, we have the AIB Bank, and the AIB Bank, you'd say, go in there any day. But behind the scenes, they have old bank books around Terence and McSweeney and Moss and Curtin. They have kind of almost like an abacus or weighing scale thing that they would have used before in terms of their banking storage. And they tell the story, and then of course the building is magnificent as well. The Masonic Hall, the Freemasons, they open their building. And again, there's this whole thing about them, did they sacrifice goods in there, is there secret handshakes? And they bring them in and they show people what they do. And it's like going into Harry Potter kind of wizard place, they've got these amazing old chairs and flags, and it's fascinating. So I suppose this is something that is, it promotes built heritage in the city and the magnificence of the city. It promotes the people who put so much time and effort into it. One of the very interesting types of buildings are the religious buildings, and it kind of harks back to, I suppose, Cork City being separate and different from other places, in that we have a huge diversity of faith in this city, and a long history of a lot of faith. So the Baptist Church opens, and the Presbyterian Church is open, and the Unitarian Church is open, and people can go in and have a look. And these are buildings that you walk past every day and you never get to go in, or you feel a bit uncomfortable and kind of think, God forbid, think, no, that's a bit disrespectful, I'm going in for a nose. But when you're welcomed in, you're kind of going, great, this is great, and I'll have a look around. So, and then we have walks and talks and exhibitions around that. But it's a huge event that happens during Heritage Week in August. And the picture here now is our only floating building. The Navy, if they are available, will send a ship into port and they open it up for the public to go and have a walk around, and you can see, where the Navy sleep and where they go to the bathroom, and kids love it, and they can get to sit up where the captain is and steer the ship and all these kind of things. So it's a really interesting day. So another part of it, and it was mentioned by the Lord Mayor about education and training, we support a project called Discover Cork Schools Heritage Project, and that is run by Councillor Kieran McCarthy, who is also a local historian, probably familiar with him. So he goes into maybe 20 or 30 schools around the city, and they have to enter a competition where they do a project on history and heritage. And it's very well received, and the standard of projects are incredible. And a lot of them, the children are kind of encouraged to go and talk to people about their project, so interview people. Some people would even go to their granny or their granddad and get the story from them. And then we have big prize giving, where they're made a big fuss of, but we get about 1,000 people. We have to take up the whole of the concert hall in the city hall is completely full of kids and their families at this prize giving. And they love it, people love it, and children love it, and it's really important. And like this year we said goodbye to a group of boys from the North Lawn, and they have been involved in this project since they were in 5th class, and now they're in Leavenside, and they're going off to college now. But some of them are going to study history, which is lovely to see. They kind of learn from it and they enjoy it. We do training for heritage groups. We produce online resources, and we've done it with films and things like that. Particularly during COVID, we did a lot of online resources. We have done training on topics like stone wall building, control of Japanese knotweed, gardening for biodiversity, done historic ironwork, which I try to do one every year, but because it's only just me, I couldn't do it every year, so it's now kind of every second, every third year I do a big training event. Then we also do publications, and we have a very good history of publications for Cork City. So our conservation officers have done publications on built heritage, our archaeologist has done several very highly acclaimed academic publications in archaeology. My publications are more for the public, so they're more kind of introductions or guidance, they're not specific. So there's a list here of some of the publications that we've done. Some of them are little booklets, and some of them are pamphlets, depending on the topic. But we try and do something every year. So this year, I'm doing one on benchmarks. I'm not sure if you're familiar what they are, but you'll probably see them on bridges in particular. So they're kind of like a carved into the stone, you see a carved circle with triangular lines, and they were benchmarks to mark the sea level. But in the time where we're all talking about climate change and sea level is rising, it's very interesting to see the changes over time. So it's a very quirky little feature that you'd have to look out for to see. So this city publication is going to explain more about what they are and how they tie into our modern world now, and the fears of, with the River Lee and flood defences and all of those things, it kind of ties into all of that story. Another part of the role, and it's becoming bigger and bigger now, is, I suppose, repair and restoration of heritage objects, and particularly signage. It's very hard to get a budget to do these things, but yet when they go wrong, it creates absolute outrage from members of the public and also the council. But it's very hard, and I suppose a lot of these heritage objects and structures, they're very important because they tell a story, and some of them are very emotive as well. So some of the projects I've been involved in would be restoration of Father Matthew, who you see up here, the National Monument, the Echo Boy, Mangan's Clock, that was another one. That was a fantastic project because we got the Stokes, who are on McCurtain Street, and they are specialists with clocks, to come down and repair Mangan's Clock, and it was fairly straightforward. But the stories that came out, people talking about how they met their husband on their first date under Mangan's Clock, before the times of where people would text you, like, if you made an appointment or a date to meet someone, you have to turn up because they'd be standing there. So there was all these stories about Mangan's Clock that came as a sidebar, really, to the actual project itself. I try and tidy up the World War I memorial every year before November, and we did some work on the Boer War memorial as well. That's up by UCC. And I was very privileged to be sent as part of a delegation to Belgium, to Ypres. There's a monster cross there to commemorate the Cork men who died in the First World War. It was very, very distressing place to be, but it was an honour to be there as well and pay our respects. Daniel Florence O'Leary is another person. There's a small little plaque to him up on Barrack Street, and if you talk to anybody from South America, he's a hero. He's buried with all of their great generals, but we hardly know who he is. And the most recent one we did was the 1798 commemorative plaque. It's a very beautiful piece. It's made of copper, but it's gone very green. It's up by Gallows Green, if you know where that is, Gould Street up by the lock. So we've had that repaired as well. And we worked with the stonemasons. They had a banner from the processions that they used to do long ago, and we got a specialist down because it's made of cloth. So we have a specialist down, and that's hanging in the museum now at the moment. And I just threw in one of the little plaques here, Cockpit Lane. These are on the ground on the North and South Main Street, and they marked the spot of the historic lanes. Some of them are blocked off now. And they were done by an artist called Liam Lavery, and what he did was he designed each of the plaques based on the archaeological finds that were found on those laneways. So if you look at the Cockpit Lane there, you can see there's little pipes and little bits of clay, designed into the plaque, so you kind of have a feeling of who was there and what they were doing. And of course, the Cockpit Lane, they had cockfighting down there back in the day, so that's why it's called Cockpit Lane. Research is a very important part of the heritage plan as well. I suppose we have to build on what we have already. It's really important. There's a lot of information out there, and I suppose that's kind of probably where the Genealogical Society comes in too, because you're such a repository of research and you have so much information. So these are the kinds of surveys and research that we do. There's a lot more than this, but I just tried to give you a kind of an idea of breadth of research that's done. So at the moment we're working on a project in St. Joseph's Cemetery. This is a very beautiful ornate gravestone there from the Barry family. And we're looking at doing kind of a management plan for St. Joseph's that looks at all aspects of heritage. And we also, last year, we finished up a habitat map of Cork City, so we have information on all of the habitats throughout the city, which is very valuable for our planners and for people who are designing roads and those kinds of things to know where the important habitats are. So I'm just going to finish up very quickly now on talking about the value of heritage, which is something that I'm trying to bang the drum a bit. Now, a lot of the research that's here is old. It's about 10 years old, but I think it still stands. It's a project I did with some other heritage officers, and really, we all know what the value of heritage is because we're involved in heritage, but when you talk to decision-makers and people in finance, they see heritage as being something that's an add-on. That's a nice to have but not essential kind of item. So when you're talking about housing or if you're talking about roads, heritage falls off the ladder in terms of funding. So we were trying to kind of put together some kind of information on that to prove that it's not just something nice, it actually has value financially, culturally, and I suppose it underlies so many of our industries that we rely on in this country. So I'm just going to finish off with a couple of slides just to show you kind of some of the research that we've done on it. The Heritage Counts one, looking at the economy. Over 4 million overseas tourists visit historical and cultural attractions. So tourists aren't coming to Ireland for the weather. They're coming for the heritage. So our tourism industry, which we rely so heavily on for all aspects of our economy, relies heavily on heritage. So if you don't support heritage, you're going to lose tourism. The environment, we look at natural heritage. Insect pollinators contribute 53 million annually to the incomes of Irish farmers and growers. And I mean, we all are aware now of the importance of bees, for example, and pollinators, but again, natural heritage. Farmers rely on natural heritage. Farmers are the custodians of most of our natural heritage. So if we don't look after our natural heritage, it's going to impact on the agricultural industry as well. Social. And I suppose this is just an example. Total attendance for Heritage Week in 2016 was nearly 500,000 people around the country. That's a lot of people for a small country, and that's just 1 week. It doesn't take into all the social events that people are involved in day to day, the work that they do for their local heritage, but also for their community. It's a place to meet like-minded people. It's a place to go to, it alleviates in terms of loneliness. If you have a group that you're interested in, you go once a week, you get to meet people. It's really important from a social point of view. And I think as well, if I said to a group of people, there's an art exhibition on, or there's a talk on their local history, people feel a lot more comfortable going to the talk on their local history because they feel it's more for them. So it's a very social activity. And the last one I'm going to talk about is health and well-being, and I suppose that became really evident during COVID, when you had your 2 kilometre or your 5 kilometre radius. People went out and they saw things that were in their local heritage, or they went and stood under a tree, or health and well-being, natural heritage in particular, is vital for that. So it's been shown that connecting with nature improves your mood by 75% and your sleep by 66%. So these are really important facts. And again, when you're talking about the amount of money that is spent on health services, mental health services, physical health services, again, heritage helps with all of those things. So I said I'd finish with that because it's all, as I say, it's very important for all of us to make the point that heritage is very important for all aspects of life. It's not a soft, easy thing. It is actually something that's very vital for us as a community and as a society to make sure that we protect and enhance our heritage, and that's what I try to do in my role as Heritage Officer. So I'm going to finish with that. I'm very happy to take any questions if anyone has any questions. This is my contact details. If anything here piques your interest, feel free to email me. It's probably the fastest way to get through to me. And yeah, that's me. Thanks very much.